Hello, today I'd like to share some photos from a great garden tour I took back in 2014. It was almost a 2-week tour and we visited many great gardens in the Lake District and Scottish borders of the UK. We departed from Toronto and it was an overnight flight, so we arrived at Manchester Airport on June 18th and the coach was there to greet us, so we hopped on board and then it was off to the Lake District to start visiting gardens. We're going purely on adrenaline here. We haven't really slept that much on the plane overnight, but we're excited to start seeing great gardens. And our first stop was Levens Hall in Cumbria. Levens Hall is a world-famous topiary garden. It's about 10 acres, and most of the gardens were laid out in 1690 and remain close to the original design. This was the first stop of our tour, and it was a wonderful way to start off. Beautiful clipped boxwood and yew hedges throughout, different shapes, forms, and color. On the topiary in the middle here, we see some red, and that is a canary creeper, except it's the red form of canary creeper. It's actually quite invasive in the UK. Again, just more of the shapes and forms. Some of these date back to the original. Some, of course, have had to be replaced, but some of them are really that old. There's so much more to Levens Hall than just their topiary gardens. Here you see some of their beautiful borders flanking a long clipped lawn walkway. The whole area is surrounded by these beautiful beech tree hedges that have been pruned and shaped meticulously. And you can actually tell if you look down the pathway that there's two hedges there and two archways that you're looking through. And this is actually looking up under one of those archways at the structure itself. And you can see how old these trees are and that they've actually knitted together. And you can just make out in the top center there that it is a beech leaf, and so it's definitely a beechwood hedge. And of course, we're in the UK, so a game of croquet is in order, and they were playing croquet on the back lawn of Levens Hall. Another one of the beautiful borders, again framed by these beautifully clipped hedges. Nice color theme going on in the borders. Here we have some beautiful hornbeam that have been espaliered. They form a tunnel and it's very cool under their canopy. There are actually 4 of these tunnels all coming to the central focal point, which is the pond with the fountain. You can see the continuation of the tunnel in the other direction. And here is the central pond and fountain. And the scale is quite large, very beautiful, very stately. They've got 10 acres to play with of gardens, so obviously they're making the most of it and have a lot of large features. Here we have a landscape feature called Haha. It was designed by Charles Bridgman, and it's really just an infinity wall, and it's used to keep grazing animals such as sheep out of the manicured gardens without a fence to block the view. So the lower meadow is actually 3 or 4 feet below the manicured lawn here. So the name comes from the astonishment of the visitor coming upon it and going, "Ha-ha." This is Levens Hall, the hall itself. We did not tour it, but it's quite spectacular and stately, so I thought I'd get a picture of that through the gate. Here we have a rock wall with a lot of little maidenhair ferns that have taken hold in the rock wall. The spores, of course, just disperse and seed. And because of the moist climate in the UK, things grow more readily than they do here. It came as a pleasant surprise to me, where these are more difficult to grow in Canada. And of course, the pastoral scene, this is just the road, the bridge that we crossed coming into Leven Hall. And when we had a little bit of extra time, I was wandering around and I saw the view, so I thought I have to capture that. It's just beautiful to see such an old stone bridge still in use. This was our hotel for the first night. Actually, we stayed in Grasmere a couple nights. This is actually a Best Western, but with much more character than some of the Best Westerns we see here. After a good night's sleep, our second day of touring gardens, we were off to Hawkshead. then on to Hilltop Farm, which is Beatrice Potter's home, a private garden called Windy Hall in Windermere, and then Whole Herd Garden, Windermere, and then a cruise on Lake Windermere. So Hawkshead was really just a stop to fill time because we had to be at Beatrix Potter's garden at a specific time. They run it like clockwork. They have people in and out there every 10-15 minutes, so your group has to be there right on time or else you get bumped. So we were killing time to make sure that we're at the other garden in time, but it was a beautiful old English village. The road goes right under these buildings here. Lots of pretty little plants and garden features. And now we're at Hilltop Farm. This is Beatrix Potter's home, and she had very nice little gardens. And as you can see, we had to wait outside till it was our turn to go in. This is part of our group. We had to break into 2 different groups to go in. This is a view of Beatrix Potter's vegetable garden, just looking over the garden fence. And they did try and include some of the features from her books. So just through the garden gate, you can see rhubarb leaves, and they did place duck eggs under there. They're plastic duck eggs, but that's a reference to Jemima Puddle Duck always putting her eggs under the rhubarb leaves. And this is one of the long borders. As I said, everything runs like clockwork here. So they actually have guests come up one side of the border, and then they have a separate path on the other side of the border where you leave the gardens from. So, and this is Marjorie Mason, who was our Canadian escort for the tour. This is the view from the other side of the trail. We're exiting the garden now, heading towards the town. And the town really takes advantage of their main feature, which would be the Hilltop Farm. And this person really was playing it up. They put a beautiful garden together, but they then put a mannequin on the bench and said it was Mr. McGregor, and you could get your picture taken with Mr. McGregor, of course, who was the nasty gardener who always chased Peter Rabbit out of the garden in Beatrix Potter's books. This is a garden that you can see when you're touring through the town, just wandering through and looking at some of the beautiful gardens. Beautiful statuary, walled gardens throughout, very old little town. Another beautiful private garden. The Cornus Cusa dogwood, flowering dogwood in the bottom left-hand corner, just spectacular. This was behind a hotel in Hawkshead. Beautiful pastoral view, rolling hills, countryside, just a beautiful view. Lovely old stately trees. This is Windy Hall. It's a private garden on 4 acres. The house is very old. It's actually converted to a house from a row of 4 different cottages that were all put together as one house. And the garden features a national collection of Aruncus and Filipendula. To have a national collection, you have to have one of each native species under a genus. So all of the Aruncus that are native to the UK would be in his collection. The first garden area we looked at in Windy Hall was a meadow garden that the owner had put in. He cleared the area and then allowed these native plants, meadow plants, to take over, and they do feature some terrestrial orchids. There is a pond area with these huge gunneria plants. The photo doesn't do it justice. Some of these are 8 feet tall at least, and the leaves might be 4 feet to 5 feet wide. Very, very stately plant, a little prickly looking. I wouldn't want to crawl in there. And he also had some very interesting ducks in his yard. We had a catered lunch at Windy Hall, and this is our group of intrepid garden explorers. Beautiful lunch, and then we went to see more of the garden. This is his front garden, which was a sunken garden. A lot of the gold in there is sedum that I think it's sedum acre that has taken over. Probably should be thinned out a bit, but still quite stunning nonetheless. He had a small glass house that we had to, well, Probably could have gone around, but he wanted to show it to us. We went through that on our way to continue through to the other gardens. Woodland path. And everywhere you see the foxglove or digitalis, they grow on their own. The seeds are dropped everywhere, and they do just take off. Another woodland path, lots of ferns, obviously thriving in the moist conditions, lots of mosses also. More mosses on a nice narrow path. Now we're off to Whole Herd Garden. This is like a botanical garden. It's completely managed by the Lakeland Horticultural Society. 17 acres. It's got a national collection of Meconopsis, Polysticum, so ferns, Astilbe, and over 300 types of hydrangeas. The actual building itself is a psych hospital. Beautiful rockery garden. Lots of heaths and heathers which weren't in bloom. A little rock rose that is blooming right now. Another beautiful view of the gardens at Whole Herd. I just love the structure of this tree on the left, how it's been opened up so that you can see the branch structure and the beautiful mosses that have grown on it. Lots of green plants, not a lot of color in the shade, more different shapes and textures of foliage. The long view through the tree tops, and you can see the building just peeking through, the chimneys peeking through over the treetops. That would be Windermere Lake in the distance, and of course the mountains. Another view of the gardens, the rockery, and looking back up the hill. Another beautiful shot of the rockery. They also had some alpine houses for the more delicate things, tinier things that might get lost in a bigger garden, and probably used to replenish the gardens themselves. Trough garden, and some of these look like they're the real thing. The old stone troughs. The main part of the garden is a walled garden, so you'll get the benefit of the warmth reflecting off those walls. The winds are cut, so definitely helps with the hardiness of the plants and gets things blooming a little earlier. Just a great mixed border here, some shrubbery in the background. They had some beautiful blue poppies. This is Hensel Violet, but they also had the pure blue ones. And here you can see the foxgloves just growing in the wild. This was on the driveway going back to the coach, and stopped to take a picture of the foxgloves that were just growing everywhere. And now we're on our boat cruise on Lake Windermere. It's the largest of the 16 lakes in the Lake District, and they use the word lakes liberally. It's nothing like our Great Lakes or the big lakes we have in our area, but they are still beautiful nonetheless, especially with the rolling hillsides. And they were very proud of this exotic bird they had in their area. So, I just wanted to share it with you. Yeah, Canada geese. They made a point of showing us the Canada geese. Lake Windermere, again, we're on the boat taking a scenic cruise of the countryside. This is what you see. You see these estates with the beautiful backdrop of the hills. Another beautiful estate. And the coach had to stop every now and then because there were sheep crossing. So we'd go down these winding little English roads, and all of a sudden we'd come to a screeching halt, and there'd be a sheep crossing. So managed to get a picture of it just over the driver's hands. Day 3, we're at still in Grassmere. We're going to go see Dove Cottage, Castle Rig Stone Circle in Keswick, and Muncaster Castle and Gardens in Ravenglass. We're in the village of Grasmere. This town is known as the home of William Wordsworth, famous poet. And the village itself has done a lot of planting of daffodils in the park in the center of town as homage to his famous poem, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. And of course, we toured the little house, kind of a Spartan type house, not too opulent, and but lovely gardens all around it. Now we made a stop to Castlereagh Stone Circle. You can see the stones for the circle itself, but of course around is all fences that have been built up to keep the sheep out, although they are in also. And that first picture was a little deceptive because it looks like there's no one around. There, of course, were lots of people around, and surprisingly, they do let tourists climb on these stones still. And it was very busy that day because it was the eve of summer solstice, so we have the drummers here for the ceremonies and things. Muncaster Castle, beautiful, stately house, large picturesque gardens, but not gardens, manicured gardens. They are more natural, pathways to hillsides, a lot of shrubs laid out to look natural, but a lot of different species. And this house was occupied by the Pennington family since 1208, so in the family for a long time. And they were really a conservation garden. They were all about keeping native plants and inviting birds and insects into the gardens. So they had these insect houses set up along the pathways. It was also a bird sanctuary, and here's what I was talking about, one of the natural pathways through a valley, lots of beautiful shrubs along the way. This was a European robin or thrush, very pretty. And here's some of their shrubs. This is Susan Lipchak, fellow master gardener from the Toronto area. She was on the tour also. And we were having our lunch in the courtyard of Muncaster Castle, and this gentleman came up to us, elderly man, wearing a sweater that's seen better days with patches on the elbow. And, he came up, he's very pleasant, started chatting with us. And then asked Susan if she was single, and she said, no, unfortunately she wasn't. And he said, oh, that's too bad. He says, do you like my home? So it turned out he was the Lord of Muncaster Castle. Beautiful blue hydrangea, just breathtaking to see it that large and that full of blooms. I did mention they were bird sanctuaries, so they have all these birds there that have been in accidents, hit by cars, been shot, had arrows through their wings, whatever. They bring them there, they take care of them, and they also do some demonstrations with them. So this was Moss, the European eagle owl, and Mortimer the buzzard, again, going through their paces. And they did what they call Heron Happy Hour. At 4 o'clock every day, you could sit on the lawn and someone would come out with food and they'd rattle the bucket and all the herons from the whole valley would come and get a piece of whatever they were offering that day. June 21st, we're going to leave Grasmere. We've been there for a couple nights now, and we're off to Devil's Porridge in Annan, Garden of Cosmic Speculation, Dumfries, and Kirkcudbright. We had to cross the mountains to get to Scotland. We were in the Lake District still in Grasmere there. Now we're heading off to Scotland. Winding little roads, narrow, up and down. Marianne had to take her gravel that day. We stopped at this little museum in Annan. It's the site of a munitions factory that was 9 miles long and was used in World War II for making smokeless gunpowder substitute. It was a combination of nitroglycerin and gun cotton. And it was staffed mainly by women because, of course, all the men were off at war. And it's actually the foundation or the basis of the TV show that was out for a while called Bomb Girls. So you see them working here, and apparently got the names Devil's Porridge when Winston Churchill was touring the munitions factory and saw them mixing this up and commented, "Isn't that just look like a devil's porridge?" Because of course it was so deadly, uh, and yet it was looked all light and fluffy like a porridge. Now we're off to the Garden of Cosmic Speculation. We did have to stop and wait for our escort Marjorie to get in touch with the gardener of the estate here. So we're just posed for a group photo so you can see that it's a small group, mainly women, a few men in the group, and all of senior age, let's say. So the Garden of Cosmic Speculation is quite famous. It's a large garden, about 30 acres, one of the homes of Charles Jenks, who was a landscape architect and theorist. His garden is inspired by science, math, fractal design, and geometry. So nothing here is random. Everything's been formulated and calculated and laid out by his calculations. This garden pathway was actually going up. So this, there's different levels at each of these rungs. So you actually are stepping up on each one. So as you can probably tell, the Garden of Cosmic Speculation is not your traditional garden that features a lot of plants. This area is called Garden of Linear Paradise, and it just features a lot of uprights, linear forms. There's the house itself on the property. In the foreground, you can see some of, again, the gardens that feature a lot of geometric shapes and designs. More shapes. And of course, in the Garden of Cosmic Speculation, you can't have anything such as a normal bench. So this is a woman that has been cut out of sheet metal to form a bench. So you see the head to the right, the one leg forms the back, second leg forms a leg of the bench, as does the two arms. So in this garden, even something as simple as a bridge isn't that simple. The rise on each step is a fraction proportionate bigger than the previous one. And that's why it's very hard to get your gait as you're going down. There's no natural rhythm to it. So people do hold the railing quite tightly using this bridge. And some of the views, the landscape, how he's carved out these different designs into the hillside. And it's quite a trompe-l'oeil. When you look at it, it looks normal, but when you're on it, it actually feels like you're going down when you're going up, just because of the angle that he's cut the slope. It's quite a deceptive visual perception thing. In fact, so much so that this lady in our group tour decided it was safer to lie down to take the picture, because you do get a bit dizzy when you look over the edge and want to take a picture. Again, tongue-in-cheek, one of his gardens was a little bit morbid, actually. And of course, there were some beautiful, just natural-looking gardens. More beautiful gardens, but with geometry included. Again, all the hedges are geometric, but they also are increasing in height and size fractionally. And now we're in Kirkcudbright. This was our home for a couple of nights. It's a Best Western Hotel again, the Selkirk Arms. The next day, we're off to Thrieve Garden in Castle Douglas. We had a free afternoon. We have the rules are that the bus driver has to get a certain amount of time off. So that was his afternoon off. So we had just a free afternoon to wander through town. There was a beautiful castle in town. A private garden that I just happened upon that was selling tickets. So a couple of us actually happened upon it at the same time and went in. And that evening, the hotel had arranged some Scottish festivities. So Thrieve Garden is actually a teaching garden. It's part of the National Trust, and this is where they teach the gardeners for their various gardens throughout the UK. It's 64 acres and lots of different types of gardens because it is a teaching garden and they're constantly being changed around. Uh, just a view of a nice garden. Of course, they need to learn maintenance, design, everything that goes with running a public garden. Lots of beautiful vistas and views, shrubbery, rock gardens, beautiful water feature, lots of ferns. The mosses have really just added a nice patina, age, naturalness to those rocks. The castle itself, where they do have a school of horticulture, and the rose gardens in the foreground. And this was just a little courtyard garden that someone had designed over the years. And you can see they put a beautiful water feature, lots of conifers. But they also, like, this is an example of one of the gardens they did that could be transformed or transported to someone's backyard. And natural areas, and you can just make out, lighting's not great on these, but these are two big faces made out of grapevines and lots of mosses on them. Now I'm just wandering around Kirkcudbright. As I said, it was an afternoon off. Came upon this beautiful wicker woven Viking ship that is just a feature in the town. This is the Castle McClellan, and it is a ruin in the middle of town. You can pay your admission, go through for a lovely tour. And it is quite amazing to see how thick those walls are. And then there was this cute little garden, and you wouldn't know it because you know, walking by, it's just a row of townhouses, old, like brownstone type townhouses, stone veneer front, and then you know, go through, you pay your admission, and you come to the back, and there's this beautiful garden, and it just goes on and on and on. Beautiful grasses, a Hakonikoa to the right there, a beautiful Japanese iris on the little footbridge, stepping stones through the pond. It looks like Astilboides in the background. It's not big enough to be Gunnera, but something along that line, Petasites or Astilboides. Lots of ferns, little water features throughout. Pathway lined by little conifers. We're still in Broughton House Gardens, but this tree was so beautiful and stately. The way that the limbs had been pruned so that you could see their structure, it was just quite spectacular in my opinion. A little bit of garden art. And they had a vegetable garden. Most English gardens do grow vegetable as well as the ornamentals. And now we're having dinner at the Selkirk Arms Hotel, and they piped in the haggis for us. They did a traditional Scottish ceremony. So here's one of the owners of the hotel in his kilt and a young bagpiper bringing in the haggis. So this is still part of the ceremony. The owner of the hotel had hired this actor to come in and give us the whole presentation. And he did Robbie Burns' Address to a Haggis, and he got quite into it. And there he had just finished attacking the haggis with his dagger, and you could see that it's now open. And of course, we did have the haggis with our dinner, and it was our appetizer, and it's actually quite tasty. Here we are after dinner doing some Scottish country dancing. And the next day we're off to Carlaverock Castle in Dumfries, Gretna Green, Housted's Roman Fort. We're crossing Scotland here, so we're heading east and on to Alnwick. Our tour guide, Marjorie Mason, had told us to be on the lookout for belted Galway cattle that were only known to that area of Scotland. And here are some. The picture was taken through the bus window, so it's not perfect, but you can see how they get their name. They've got the large white belt down their center. Now we're at a ruin, castle ruin called Caerlaverock Castle. It's a moated triangular castle, so it's in a triangular shape, and it's quite an impressive structure. It's too bad it's a ruin. It's an old 13th century castle, and you walk towards the building and you can see the bridge there going over the moat. You can see the size of these walls, and there's you can see the moat to the left also. This stop took us to Gretna Green. It was a lunch stop. It's a bit of a tourist trap. Gretna Green was famous for the quickie weddings. The people could go to the blacksmith shop and get wed, kind of like the equivalent of running off to Vegas for a quickie wedding. Since it was a tourist trap, they did have a bagpiper playing, and he had his jar out for money or his bowl out for money. And as one of the members of our tour said, "You've got to pay the piper," as she put her money in his bowl. And because it is a tourist trap, they have a hello, welcome in all the different languages. Now we're heading up to Housted's Roman Fort. It's part of Hadrian's Wall. As we're climbing up or walking up this hill, we were treated to a display of sheep herding. And it wasn't on show. This was actually the farmer bringing the sheep in, and you can see the sheepdog to the right kind of guiding the sheep along and getting them through that little gate. Now we're at Housted's, and you can see it is just ruins, but archaeologists have been able to determine what was what and drawn out plans based on that. It's quite amazing to see this because, of course, it's so old and has so much history attached to it. Quite well preserved considering how old it is. And there's part of Hadrian's Wall, and again, it amazes me that people walk on this, considering the history. It's a shame to see them walking on it, and yet it also shows you how well built it was, that it's withstood that long since 124 AD. And I just had to take a picture of this sign because this was at the base of the site before you walked up the hill. And of course, you can read for yourself. But whilst the latrines at Housted are the best preserved Roman toilets in Britain, you may want to make use of our modern toilet facilities before you visit. Things were done very differently in Roman times. Today we spent the whole day at Alnwick Castle in Alnwick, Northumberland. It was a very large estate. We toured the castle itself, plus all the grounds. This is the entrance to the castle. It was the home, or is still the home, of the Duke of Northumberland, and it was used for some of the filming of Harry Potter. This corner of Alnwick Castle is where they filmed the broomstick flying classes. So this is a beautiful countryside scene viewed from the walls of Alnwick Castle. And of course, there's actually nothing natural about it. The creek or river used to be actually closer to the castle, but it was decided that it couldn't be viewed properly if it was that close. They needed to move it back, so that's just what they did. The creek was moved back, the slope was regraded down towards the creek, and the trees were planted again. Now, of course, you've got to remember that in the times that they did this, they didn't have modern excavation equipment, so all of this was done manually. Now we're visiting the more formal, manicured parts of the garden. Here we have a series of fountains that are timed to music and lights. There's hedges along both sides of the fountains. There's actually two rows of hedges with pathways between, and the hedges arching over top. So it's a narrow tunnel-like pathway through. Very nice because you can peek through the hedge at certain points and see the fountains. Beautiful display of delphinium. I also like the way they made the tripods out of the bamboo for the delphiniums to grow through and staked. And you can see some of the taller ones are actually covering their stakes, so they look quite natural. Astrantia and primula. The vegetable garden at Onyx Castle, again, it was a teaching garden, so they had students come in regularly and tend to the gardens, and they had projects that the students got involved in, such as the scarecrows. And at the base of each garden, there were these bags, and they were experimenting with growing potatoes in the bags. And this was all done by young local students. And some of the gardeners made use of their old garden work boots and used them as planters on the fence. And just a pretty little garden scene. Again, you've got the effect, the warming effect of that wall, but it's something that could be recreated on a home-sized garden. Now we're off to Bamburgh Castle in Northumberland, and this was just a quick stop to take pictures. The Holy Island of Lindisfarne, Northumberland, Dunbar, Glenkinchie Distillery in East Lothian, and Peebles. And there's Bamburgh Castle. As I said, it was just a quick photo stop, but wow, huge castle on a hill on the coast. Now we're heading to the Holy Island of Lindisfarne. We're on the causeway that gets flooded out regularly, so you have to check the schedule when you're going over there. It's an island a certain percent of the time, and then the tide comes in and the road is no longer accessible. So when it is open, you get a steady stream of buses going in. And of course, they all want to get out before the tides come in. So you can see the tides are out. This sailboat's way above water. And you can see the view. It's very pretty. There's the castle. And it's quite a steep climb up this hill to go see this castle. We had the option of touring the castle or going around and seeing more of the gardens. I opted for more gardens. It's an old 16th century castle. And going up the hillside, it was just a bright blush of red and pink, and it was all this Centranthus, which is called red valerian, but it's not in the same family as valerian, but Centranthus rubra. So since this was a tour of Scottish Borders and Lake District, I thought it was very appropriate to include a picture of the national floral emblem of Scotland, the thistle, but unfortunately we're still in Northumberland, so I don't know how appropriate it is, but here it is, thistle in beautiful bloom. So as was quite popular at that time was to have the gardens separate from the castle or manor so that they were a destination to go visit. We have a walled garden here. At one point it was redesigned by Gertrude Jekyll, and you can see right now it's in a bit of a state of disrepair. They are trying to get it back in order, but some of the plants like the lambs here have tried to take over. But it's still an excellent example of a walled garden. And remember that sailboat we saw that had its rudder just sticking right in the sand and no water around it? There it is again, coming back down the hill. The tide's starting to come in. And it is called the Holy Island because there was a medieval priory there, and these are the ruins from that priory. Now we're heading back down the causeway off the island, and you can see the warning sign basically saying that if the waters come up this high, you better turn around. Dunbar, just a quick lunch stop, but a pretty little town. And again, right, Scottish flag flying right next to a ruin. And if you're touring Scotland, you've got to go see a Scotch distillery. So here we are stopped at Glenkinchie to see the production of their fine aged Scotch. The next day, we're off to see the woolen mills in Selkirk, Floors Castle and Gardens in Kelso, Melrose Abbey in Melrose, and Harmony Garden in Melrose. The woolen mills were quite fascinating, very loud and noisy. Here you can see one of the weaves at work. Uh, they do some beautiful tartans here, many of the historic family tartans, but also specialty tartans. They designed the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's tartan. And a sampling of some of the different tartans that they've designed and mill there. Now we're at the beautiful Flores Castle and their spectacular gardens. It's the country house for the Duke of Roxburgh. Little courtyard garden, quite spectacular. Some nice statuary there. Great ivy on the house. Now the gardens, as quite often is the case with English gardens, are set in a distance from the manor or castle itself so that you had a destination to stroll through. This is a walled garden, extensive perennial borders, lots of topiary, quite a beautiful garden. Lovely borders. The Aruncus features prominently, a lot of blues and yellows in bloom right now. Again, the Aruncus, surrounded by lots of geraniums, catnaki, phlox, it looks like, roses in the background, scabious, lots of beautiful color going on. A red border, flowers and leaf foliage, lots of different shades of red. Now we're on to Harmony Garden in Melrose. Again, this was just a free time stop. There was lots to see in this little town. We wandered on our own, and there was this private garden that was open for viewing. Just put your money in the box and take a map and wander on through. Beautiful borders, very well kept. Boxwood hedge in the front, keeping everything tidy and neat. More of the borders, vegetable production in the background. Melrose Abbey in the background also. Beautiful borders. And there's Melrose Abbey. Fortunately, it's just a ruin now. You could tour through it. We didn't have time. Well, chose to do gardens instead of an abbey. And wander through town. Beautiful footbridge crossing the river. Fly fishermen at the river. Lovely private garden, just peeking down their driveway. And now we're back on the bus, and I just wanted to try and capture how narrow and winding these roads were. And this is through the front window of the coach. June 27th, we're now going to visit the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and Rosslyn Chapel. There was a orchid show on display in the front hall of the Botanical Garden. So we walked through that before we even got to the gardens itself. Some beautiful bee houses, insect hotels. This one was made out of old tires. Beautiful archway leading off to the gardens. This was a very big, long border, and it was done in rainbow shades. So you get your blues, then your mauves, then more reds, then oranges, then yellows, and it just goes on. The botanical garden had 28 greenhouses, glass houses, and it was really hard to get through all of them in the time we had, so we went very quickly. The Alpine house was spectacular. It was not to be missed, and it was fairly recently redone, so it was quite nice to see. Here's some of the rockery, some of the alpine plants, more alpines. They did a wall in the alpine garden that featured tufa rock with lots of little plants growing in it. The bog garden with pitcher plants. More of the outdoor alpine beds. Lots of things growing on the wall itself and in the beds. Another little corner of the alpine garden, featuring some trough gardens. More trough gardens. A beautiful bed of crocosmia and bear's breeches acanthus in the foreground. Oh, now we're in one of the glass houses. This is the palm house. And of course, the temperature shift was quite dramatic, very humid in here. A Phragmipedium orchid. The Queen Victoria water lilies. Again, so large and strong, structurally strong, that people would sit on them, just to show how strong they were. Beautiful water lily, nice pale blue. And this is horsetail, giant horsetail, but horsetail nonetheless. It's quite spectacular looking, but I still don't want it growing on my property. The cactus house. And some of the outdoor beds. Rolling landscape, beautiful gardens. And there was a wedding taking place in the garden. So I thought I'd snap a few pictures. Here they are under the beautiful trees, and that's where the ceremony is taking place. Primula, one of my favorite plants. Wish I had a stand of them that looked this spectacular. I'm trying. And behind it is the blue poppy, Meconopsis. Now, they were worried about a blight that was attacking rhodos, and they have a large rhododendron and azalea collection. So these footpaths, they're very spongy, and they were full of a disinfectant. So we had to step on those before we entered and left so that our shoes were disinfected and we weren't taking the blight to our next garden. Now, we stopped at Rosslyn Chapel, which is famous from the Da Vinci Code. It's built in the mid-15th century, and it's still privately owned by the 7th Earl of Rosslyn. So as you can see, these very ornate carvings on the Rosslyn Chapel itself, and there's a lot of symbolism in these carvings. The chapel features prominently in the book, the Da Vinci Codes, and as you know, the Knights Templar also play a big role, and so their mysticism and symbolism is included in this chapel. So the trip is winding down, but we've still got another stop at Drumlanrig Castle in Thornhill, Dumfries House in Ayrshire, and then we're off to Glasgow. Our next stop takes us to Drumlanrig Castle. It's been the home of the Douglas family for 600 years, and they are the Duke and Duchess of Buccleuch and Queensberry. Drumlanrig Castle, the estate's about 90,000 acres. It's very large. They have gardens around the castle, walled gardens, beautiful rolling hillsides, just a wonderful place to wander through and explore. Some of the formal gardens with some topiary. The blue plant is all Nepeta. It looks like lavender, but it's Nepeta. Again, more than Nepeta. Has a longer bloom period. And this is the first Douglas fir that was planted in the UK. It was brought back by explorers from the BC coast. And again, more of the beautiful candelabra primula that I love. Another lovely display, a lot of different colors here. Again, the castle with the gardens in the foreground. And a different view of the gardens. But even the lawns have been cut symmetrically and in patterns that match the design of the garden beds. Now we're on to Dumfries House, one of our last stops. This estate was on the chopping block. The people had no longer had the resources to take care of it. Had one of the largest collections of Chippendale furniture, and Christie's auctions were coming in to take care of it and do a sale. Prince Charles got wind of it and said, no, we have to preserve this collection, this estate. So he got the National Trust involved. They raised enough money. It wasn't through taxpayers. It was all done through National Trust fundraising. And they were able to save it from the chopping block and restore it to its current beautiful state. And it was about to open again to the public. We were allowed to tour the house, but the gardens were just finishing the renovations and were about to be opened by the Queen herself. So they didn't allow us in before the Queen. So now we're wandering through the estate and on our way to visit the gardens themselves. And as you can see, they've done a lot of restoration, a lot of young trees that will come into their maturity and make this quite beautiful. Beautiful bridge along the way to get to the gardens. And now you can see the gardens in the distance. We weren't actually allowed in. As I said, the Queen was opening them and we could only peek through the gate, so we could not get close up. But you can see their walled garden also. They've got fountains, they've got the large glass house there. And I imagine stop on a next visit to the UK. So the tour is basically over. We did spend the night in Glasgow and just toured around there, walked around the city of Glasgow for a bit, and then caught our plane the next morning back to Canada. This tour was hosted by Marjorie Mason. She was our Canadian escort and was put together by Denier Tours. Now, Marjorie currently does tours with the Toronto Botanical Gardens and Paul Zammit. She's done some interesting tours with them. Well worth looking into if you're interested in this type of garden tourism. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the tour of these gardens as much as I enjoyed visiting them myself. Thank you.